Hey everybody, it's Mr. Saran and I'm going to show you how to create a sunset painting with acrylic paints. Okay, so everything that you're going to need should be provided for you in class, and if you're online then it will be provided as a kit that you'll bring home and work on this painting at home. Okay, so you should have a square tip brush. Okay, this is what it looks like, and you should have a palette or a plate where you're going to put your paints. You'll have a canvas board, okay, and you should have a cup of water. Okay, it doesn't matter what temperature it's at. It really doesn't matter. Warm is good. And then this is the painting that we're going to be working on. Okay, so it should look a little something like this. And I think that's all you need. Oh, and chalk. All right, let's get started. All right, so the first step is to paint the entire canvas yellow. So you see in the sky here, everything is yellow, and so we're going to be painting basically light to dark. Okay, you don't always have to do that with acrylic paints. You see here that we put some white on top of the darker colors, and with acrylic paints you can do that. Watercolor is a different story. You can't really do that, okay? But with acrylic paints it's cool because you can paint colors right on top of another color, and it will be very strong. The color will show up really well, like this white shows up very well. Now what we're going to do is paint the entire canvas yellow, and you might need a little bit of water on your brush to help the paint spread, but don't use too much, because if you use too much the color will not be as vibrant, and also you'll get drips. If you use too much water, this is what's going to happen. You'll get drips like that, and we don't want that. If you do get drips, you can try to hurry and brush them out like this, or you can use a paper towel to kind of dab it and dry it off. If you don't use enough water, then you might get chunks of yellow that don't really spread around very well. So you want to get a good happy medium, okay, or a good even mixture of paint and water. Now remember to keep your strokes going left to right, because this is a landscape painting, and so the sky, we want it to look like it's going left to right. Okay, you guys, so now that we have a yellow canvas, what we want to do is we want to make a mixture of yellow and orange, but we want to do a very tiny bit of orange, just a tiny bit. You see how little that amount was? And I want to create just a golden yellow, something that's a little bit more orangey than my yellow here, but nowhere near as dark as this orange. Now this is one of the biggest mistakes that people have made in this class, is mixing their orange too dark. This should be kind of like a golden yellow, or like a mac and cheese kind of color, right? And we need to make enough of it that we can create some of these clouds. We want to just do the first layer of this very pale orange. So now we've got our color, we want to get all of the excess paint off of our brush. We do not want a big chunk of paint or a blob of paint on the brush. So I'm going to dab it on the plate, and you see on my brush I have very little paint. It's just kind of the paint that's stuck inside the bristles, but I don't have a big blob of paint that's hanging on the edge of my brush. And what I'm going to do is I might need to get a little bit wet, not too wet that it's dripping, but just a little bit wet so that the paint moves smoothly. Okay, so you have a third of the way up. You should be able to split it into 3 pieces. And okay, so we're going to take the bottom third, and I'm going to make a mark here, and I'm going to make a mark here on the other side, and I'm going to create a very thin line. That will be our horizon line. Now at first you won't be able to see it hardly at all. It's just going to be a very faint line, and that's going to tell us where the horizon line is. The horizon line is this line here. Now I made this a little thick. I would make sure you don't go any thicker than that. You might even want to make it thinner than that. And the way you get that is not by holding the brush like this, because that will get a very thick line, right? You don't want to paint it like that. You want to paint it like that. So you hold your brush this way. Not this way, yes, this way. Okay, so you're going to create your horizon line, and then with some water, we're going to treat this almost like watercolor, where we're going to kind of blend it with a little bit of water, and we're going to just lightly apply this color that's going to be, it's very light, but you should be able to see it on top of the yellow. If you can't see it showing up at all, it means it's too light. Okay, but most of the time people mix this color way too dark and they just start with like a pure orange almost, and it's just not gonna work. Now, if you want to make an orange like this, you're gonna have to use like 80% or 90% yellow and maybe 10% orange. So I'm pulling these strokes in from the sides, bringing them into the middle, okay? Now you can do a mixture of both, dragging it this way and dragging it this way, okay? You'll get a variation of line thickness, which is really good. You want some clouds to be thicker and wider and some to be thinner. You also don't want to pull them all just from the sides into the middle, okay? That's what I'm starting with, but you also want to create some in the middle like this, right? Some kind of that just go through the canvas like this. Some that might be attached to each other. What you don't want is tiger stripes, okay? You don't want even stripes that are perfectly spaced out from each other. You don't want them the same size. You don't want them the same length, okay? Everyone has to be different and random. So now that I've done this kind of golden yellow, I can slowly start to add more orange to my color, to the color that I've mixed here on the plate. So you can see I'm adding a tiny, tiny bit more orange. If you need to, again, use a little bit of water and go brush over those same strokes that you've already done multiple times. You see how I'm brushing over the same stroke multiple times? And it's helping things blend in with each other. If you don't get things to blend, it either means you're using a color that's too dark or you're not using enough water. So use a good enough amount of water, but also get the excess drips off so it's not like dripping all over, okay? But you'll get it to blend well if you use some water. But I am adding more orange to my mixture to make it darker. So I'm going to do the same thing, okay? One thing that's very important to do is leave an area over here that's light, okay? You want to be able to have a space where you can create the sun. You don't want to go crazy with the dark orange or anything over in this area. You want to leave it light in this area as well as in this bottom area because the sun has a reflection, and so we need to keep these two areas fairly light and more yellow, okay? So I'm going to add my lighter orange. I should have just done the lighter orange all over and then gone onto the darker orange. So you can definitely do that. You're going to drag the paint. Don't be too perfectionist about this side because it will be covered up with black. Okay, just kind of quickly put in the color there. And then you're going to just put some of the orange in this area, but you're going to keep this area less orange, okay? It's going to be more just yellow. You're going to keep it bright. But you can add some of the pale orange in there. Okay, so now I'm finishing up the orange. I'm using my brush like this to be able to get the fine edges because I don't want a big cloud that has a crisp, like straight edge up and down because that looks, it just kind of looks weird, okay? So I'm finishing up this orange and now I'm going to go in with the red. Just a tiny dot of red like that. And I probably won't even use all of that paint, okay? So I'm going to mix a little bit with the orange to make it softer and not so dark. I'm going to use some water. So now I have this kind of orangey red color, and I'm going to go over the horizon line. Right, I'll add a little bit more red in there. And then I'm just going to add a few red clouds here and there. Like, I don't want it to be super strong, okay? And I might even blend them out with water, you see? Now, again, did you see how I did this cloud? Let's do another one where I can do it the wrong way. See, you don't want that because then you get a hard edge that's straight up and down, and that doesn't look like a cloud, right? So we're going to blend it out. I'm going to blend it out this way, holding the brush, laying down like that, and I'm going to kind of blend it out. Now, this kind of goes up, and I feel like it looks kind of ugly, so I'm going to get all the paint off my brush as much as I can, just get a little bit of water there, and then try to blend it out. Okay, now again, remember we're leaving this area fairly light and yellow, okay? So I'm adding red, but I don't want to add red to this area. Remember, you can blend it out by going over the stroke multiple times, brushing over it. If you just do one stroke and leave it like that, then you're going to get a very stark line, right? And that doesn't look super good. So what you want to do is go over it multiple times and kind of drag the paint until you get something that you like. Now, a huge mistake that people make is also using too much paint on the brush. They use tons, and then it's just this big, thick, dark line and stuff. And so you just want to use a very little bit of paint on your brush and just kind of use the little bit of paint and a little bit of water to blend things out. I am going to now do the sun. So what I'm going to do first is make a mixture of yellow and white. Basically, it's going to be mostly white and a little bit of yellow. We're just making like a very pale yellow color. This is going to be kind of like the glow of the sun. And then we will go over it with a really bright white in some areas to really highlight it and make it stand out. Okay, so again, I have this small brush. It's a square tip brush, and now what I want to do is I want to create my sun, but I don't want to create it like you would normally think you would with just a circle or a half circle. What we're going to do is we're actually going to create it with just lines. You want it to be white enough that you can see it on top of this yellow background though. Okay, so I'm going to create this sun. Now I need to do it in this area. I can't do it in the middle. Do not put it in the middle because the palm trees will cover it and it just won't look good. You need to let the sun stand on its own. So I'm going to put it here on the left side, and I'm just going to go back and forth with these lines. But each line gets shorter as it goes up, right? So that it's going to create this dome without doing a stark outline. If you do a stark outline, it's going to look very kind of cartoony and not realistic. We want the rays of light to just kind of be spread out like this through horizontal strokes, okay? Okay, now here on the bottom it's similar but slightly different because you're going to do little dashes of light, of a reflection, and again, your dashes are going to get smaller, or overall, this reflection is going to get smaller as it fades into the distance over here. Now, you don't want to cover up the horizon line completely, but I did go over it with a little bit of white and that yellow mixture. I still want you to be able to see the horizon line, but it just brightens it up, makes it a little bit softer. I didn't do that here, but I think it looks really good if we soften it up, okay? So I would recommend doing that. So now we have our initial sun. It's not super bright like this one is, but that's because we just have the first layer. All right, so now we're going to create the brighter highlights in the sun. So we're going to take just complete white, not mixed with any yellow, not mixed with anything, just straight white. And we're going to go over these lines that we did. Now, we're not going to cover up all of the yellow we did. We're just going to go on the inside. So you'll see that the edges of that lighter yellow color is still showing through. And we're just going to highlight the inside of the sun. So we don't need to go over the horizon line anymore. I felt like with the yellow, the light yellow that we did over the horizon line is good enough of the kind of like this glow. And so now I'm going to take some more white and brighten up some of these highlights. They're kind of like little dashes, okay? Little dashes for the waves. And you might need to go over these a couple times because if you use water to create these dashes, they're going to be a little bit transparent, which means see-through. You're not going to be able to see them very clearly. You want these to be more opaque, which means the opposite of see-through. It's very like strong and bright. Okay, so that's what you want for these white highlights. And if you need to, you can go over them multiple times. If you leave this area completely yellow, you will not see very much of the white strokes. So that's why you can put some of the orange color in here in this area. Don't go crazy with any red. But you do need some contrast, meaning you do need a darker color in order to be able to see the white. It shouldn't be just yellow, there should be some color. And as you can see, I have some orange weaved throughout. So now we have our sun. Remember, we made it taper. Our reflection is as white as the sun here, but then it slowly tapers and gets skinnier, right, as it goes down. So you can see it even more clearly here probably. All right, so now we are going to create this hill, right? And we want it to be wavy and bumpy and natural looking. If you create just a perfect mound, like a perfect circle kind of thing, it's just gonna look very fake and cartoony. So we're gonna start about halfway. See, this is about halfway. And we're going to create a hill with some bumps and stuff. It can be however you want, really. And then it's going to go just barely past the horizon line. Now, don't create like 3 even bumps, for example. You want the bumps to be very different from each other. So one will be higher, one will be lower. You also want to spread this out so it tapers, kind of goes at a slant, because if you do it like this and it just drops off like that, it'll look like a cliff, which this is supposed to look like a relaxing sunset, not like a place where people could fall off a cliff and die. We're gonna taper that off. We're gonna kind of make this a little hill, okay? Now we have our different like bumps and hills. We're now gonna do the trees. The trees are gonna be drawn with one single line. A lot of people were drawing these as 2 separate lines, a left and a right side for the trunk, but don't do that because the trunk will become too thick. And these trunks for palm trees need to stay thin. Okay, so a palm tree usually has a curve to it. They're long and skinny, but they usually have a curve. So even this one that we're gonna make standing pretty straight up is gonna be, it's gonna have a slight curve to it. Okay, so now I'm making these trees. Remember, it's just one single line and they have a curve, and some are going to kind of overlap each other. But we don't want for the leaves, where the leaves are gonna be, we don't want those overlapping because it'll get messy. So we just want some of the trunks to be overlapping. Some are gonna be small, some are gonna be larger trees, right? So I have my trees kind of mapped out where I want them. I would not do more than 6, do 5 or 6, no more than that. All right, so we're going to draw the first branches that come off of the trunk are going to be these small ones that curve in towards the trunk, okay? Kind of towards the trunk like that. And then these next ones are gonna be going out, but they do have a curve, right? All of these have a curve, and then these come out a little bit more like that, and then our last ones go like that, okay? So they mirror each other. They're the same on each side, basically, same on the left side as the right side. Usually you're gonna have like 6 to 8 branches, so I wouldn't do more than 8 branches because that'll get crazy. And if you do fewer than that, it might look kind of scarce. And one of the most important things about these trees is that they should all start at a center point. These branches should all meet at the same point, okay? So we have the branches here, they meet at the center point. And then these other branches will come and branch off at the center point. Same here, okay? So you should have just one dot that they all meet at, okay? You don't want to draw a tree where you have the trunk, and then you have a branch, and 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 a branch, like that, okay? Should not be separated. They should all meet at the same point, okay? Okay, I'm gonna do this tree. I'm gonna do this tree, but I do not want it to cross over the sun. It can be close to it, but I don't want it to cross over, okay? Now that we have our chalk outline, we're going to paint it with black. With black here in the hill, and I'm using this dabbing motion to create this texture. I do not want to fill it in with lines because I want it to look kind of bushy. Now, if some of the orange shows through a little bit, that's okay. You can see here, some of the orange shows through a little bit, and that's great. Now, you might need a little bit of water to help this black paint spread. Okay, if you use just the black paint by itself, it might be thick and gloppy and it might not spread very well. But if you use too much water, it'll be transparent and it won't be dark enough. So just try to get a good mix. Just a little bit of water will help the paint spread and help it all look really good. I do not want smooth edges. I want bushy texture, all right? So I'm just kind of moving my brush in different directions to try to get this plant texture or like this grassy kind of texture. If you want to, you could even do kind of blades of grass coming out like this by kind of flicking the brush, or you can make it look more bushy by like dabbing it, okay? So it's whatever you want to do. You just want to give it some texture so it's not perfectly rounded or just flat or boring looking. Okay, so we have our textured hill here, and now we're going to start to do our trunks. So what we want to do is start at the base of the trunk, and we want to make sure we have enough water on our brush, not too much, right? Because then it's just going to bleed everywhere, and so we want to do a little bit of water, and we're just going to very carefully work our way up the trunk, okay? And the base will be thicker, just slightly, and then the top will get thinner. Try to get it as smooth as you can, okay? If it's a little wobbly, that's okay. Now, I'm gonna go over these lines just a little bit, but I'm using very little pressure and very little paint on my brush. Okay, so I flatten out the paint on my brush like this and try to get any blobs off. I do not want a lot of paint and I don't want blobs. And then I get a little bit of water and just kind of mix it on the plate to make sure it's not dripping. And then I'm going to start again at the base here and work my way up. Now I'm going to slightly lift my paintbrush off the canvas as I work my way up, right? So I have more pressure here and then lighter pressure here, barely touching the canvas, barely touching it at all. All right, so now we're going to do the branches. Now it's very important that you pay close attention to this step. If you follow my lead, then I think you'll be really happy with your painting and the branches will turn out great. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do one branch at a time. I'm going to get a little bit of paint on my brush, not a lot. I don't have a blob, just a tiny bit. I have some water, and I'm going to trace that line that I made with the chalk, and then I'm going to drag the paint while it's still wet down like this, okay? To create these little hanging leaves on the palm tree. And I'm going to do one at a time, okay? What I don't want to do is do the outline and then another outline, another outline, another outline, and then drag the leaves down, because by then the paint will dry. So you want to do it while the paint is still wet. And really with acrylic paint, since it's water-based, you only have a couple minutes before it dries. Okay? So again, I'm just going to get more paint on my brush. If you don't get a fine line and it comes a little bit thicker like that, just add a tiny bit of water and you'll get kind of a more solid line. Okay, then I'm going to drag the paint like this, kind of flick it down like that, and with these brushes, since they have these bristles that are slightly separated, you'll get this in these leaves kind of naturally. But you have to remember not to press down really hard. If you press down hard, you're going to get chunks of leaves and it's not going to look good. If you press down too hard, you'll get something that looks like this. You'll have your branch, and then if you press hard, then this is what you get. A big solid chunk of leaves that don't look like leaves. Right? You want to do really soft pressure, and then you'll get individual leaves, okay? The branches will curve at the ends, right? They have this curve to them. So that's really important. Also remember, something that people struggled with was they tried taking these branches that are closest to the trunk here, and they would paint the bristles in like this. Let's see, so here's the branches and here's the trunk. They would paint them in like this, going sideways. But remember, gravity's going to pull them down. All right, so I've used that technique for all of these branches, dragging the paint down, okay? And then I filled in the centers with some black. So kind of just did like a black little dot here, dot here, dot here, right? Just in the center of the trees. Okay, and now we're basically done with our painting. We just have some chalk lines that we need to take care of, so we're going to let this dry completely. And then once we're done with that, we'll be able to take our brush, and with some clean water, just a little bit of water on our brush, we'll be able to wipe those chalk marks off. And when acrylic paint dries, it becomes water resistant, so it's not going to mess up your painting to go over with a little bit of water and a clean brush and wipe off those chalk marks. Okay, so I changed out my water so it doesn't have all those colors in it. Okay, it's clean water. I've got my brush and it's totally clean, no paint in it whatsoever. If you don't make sure these two things are clean, then you'll have issues when you try to wipe the chalk off, and you might even mess up your painting, and you don't want that. So I'm just going to get a little bit of water on the brush, wipe off the excess drips and stuff. Okay, I don't want it to be super wet. And now I'm just going to brush off these chalk marks, okay? And every once in a while you might need to dip the brush back into the water and wipe off some of the chalk off your brush. Okay, you're just going to go into these areas where you have chalk and wipe it off. All right, so here is our finished painting, and I'm so proud of you guys for all the hard work that you're doing, and I hope you had fun with this project. If you have any questions, let me know. And hello again, this is Mr. Saran. Remember to clean up and clean out your brushes. Do it. Clean out your brushes. If you don't, then the paint will dry and it can ruin the brush. Don't do that. Hot water and soap will help the paint come out of the brushes. Wash them out. Okay. All right. Okay.
Stop it.
Okay.
I keep getting away from you and you come forward.
Okay. Once you do that, oops. Let's edit that part out.